Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is Mr. Midnight Lullabies. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep, but before you drift off, I'd like for you to leave a comment, letting me know where in the world you are listening from. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. All right, now let's get comfortable, relax, and dive into tonight's cases. Story 1. She was 22 years old, bright-eyed, ambitious, grounded. Logan Federico had plans, real ones. She wasn't just imagining a future. She was building one. A future where she'd teach children, shape young minds, and live a life filled with purpose. She wasn't in the wrong crowd. She wasn't making reckless choices. She wasn't walking into danger. She was visiting friends. A quick trip, a weekend away, just a few hours south of home. Columbia, South Carolina. May 3rd, 2025. A rental home on Cypress Street. From the outside, it looked like any other quiet house on any other quiet street. But inside, a moment was about to unfold that would change everything. For Logan, for her family, and for everyone who loved her. She had no warning, no chance to fight, no time to run. In a matter of seconds, Logan Federico went from a daughter, a friend, a future teacher, to a victim of gun violence. Her life taken inside a place that was supposed to be safe. What happened inside the house would send shockwaves far beyond Columbia. A young woman's life was stolen, and the questions that followed, why, who, how, led investigators down a path of theft, deception, and cold calculation. And at the center of it all, a man police say broke in, took what he wanted, and left a family shattered. This is not the story of someone who got caught up. This is not a warning tale of risky behavior. Logan Federico did everything right, and she was still killed. Her death is a reminder how fragile the boundary is between ordinary and irreversible. It's about more than one man's crime. It's about the whole left behind, the people who must now live in its shadow, and the silence that follows when the voice of someone full of promise is suddenly gone. Tonight, we tell her story, in full, carefully, thoroughly, because her name deserves to be remembered, and the truth deserves to be known. This is the murder of Logan Federico, a home invasion that shattered a family. Before the headlines, before the crime scene, before the police tape, the court dates, and the questions, there was Logan. She was born in Waxhaw, North Carolina, a town where people know your name, where neighbors wave from their porches, and where growing up still felt like something safe. From a young age, Logan stood out, not in the loud, attention-seeking way some kids do, but in the way that makes teachers remember you. She was thoughtful, kind, a steady presence in any room. She loved children, not just in passing, not just when it was easy. She genuinely cared. She wanted to teach, to guide, to show kids that they mattered. Her dream was to become a school teacher, not because of the paycheck, not for recognition, but because she believed it was meaningful, because she believed it was right. In a world that often feels chaotic and fast, Logan moved with intention. She worked hard. She was careful with her choices. Her social media wasn't full of drama. It was full of joy, smiles with friends, beach trips, inside jokes, that kind of ordinary happiness people don't usually notice until it's gone. Her father, Stephen Federico, described her as his best friend. In one of the most painful moments of his life, he said the words no parent should ever have to say. That day, I could not be her hero. Logan wasn't reckless. She didn't put herself in harm's way. She was doing what any of us might do, taking a trip, visiting people she knew, stepping away from a routine for a little while. And it's that normalcy that makes what happened to her even harder to comprehend. When people talk about Logan now, they don't use past tense lightly. They pause. They choke up, because talking about her means accepting that she's not here anymore. Her absence isn't just felt in empty bedrooms or unanswered texts. It's in the moments she should have had. The children she never got to teach, the life milestones she never got to reach. Logan Federico was real. She mattered, and she should be alive today. It was a Friday night, May 3rd, 2025. Logan Federico was in Columbia, South Carolina. She wasn't alone. She was with friends, staying in a rental home on Cypress Street. It was a brief visit, a getaway. There was no warning, no heated argument, no ongoing feud, no troubled past creeping back in. Just a house, a group of young people, a night that should have ended in laughter, conversations, maybe plans for the next day. But somewhere else in Colombia, another man was moving with an entirely different purpose. Authorities say his name is Alexander Dickey, 30 years old. He had no connection to Logan, no relationship, no personal grudge. He wasn't invited. He wasn't expected. And yet, he came anyway. Earlier that evening, Dickey had allegedly broken into another nearby residence, taking a firearm, car keys, and whatever else he could grab. Then, according to investigators, he made his way to the Cypress Street home where Logan was staying. It was after dark. He approached the house. Police believe he forced his way in, armed, focused. We may never know the exact words that were spoken inside. We may never know what Logan saw in that final moment, whether she had time to react, to plead, to run. But we do know this. She was shot in the chest. The bullet took her life. Quickly, brutally. By the time emergency responders arrived, it was too late. Logan was pronounced dead at the scene. Her friends, those who had been in the house with her, were left in shock, grief, trauma. There are no instructions for what to do when someone is murdered beside you. No guide for how to pick up the pieces when it happens that suddenly. And then, as fast as it started, it was over. Dickey fled. He took the stolen vehicle and disappeared into the night. But this wasn't just a violent act. It was part of a string of calculated moves. Later that same evening, police say he used Logan's debit card to make purchases at multiple locations across the city, as if nothing had happened, as if her life meant nothing. While Logan's family was receiving the call no one ever wants to answer, while her father, Stephen, was falling to the floor in grief, her killer was still moving, still spending, still free. And it wasn't just one bad decision or one chaotic moment. It was deliberate, thought out, carried out with purpose. At the rental home, investigators began piecing things together. They found signs of forced entry. They began reviewing surveillance footage, talking to neighbors, analyzing every clue they could find. For the Federico family, the next few days were a blur. The kind of blur where time bends, where food has no taste, where sleep feels impossible. They had to tell people. They had to start explaining the unexplainable. One minute, their daughter had been texting, laughing, alive. The next, she was gone. And at the center of it all, an act of senseless violence. In a place where no one saw it coming. In a moment that should never have happened. The home on Cypress Street was cleared. The police wrapped up their initial investigation. But for those closest to Logan, nothing about life was ever going to feel normal again. A 22-year-old with dreams of shaping the future was now part of a case file, a press release, a crime stat. But this wasn't just an incident. It wasn't just a shooting. It was a life taken violently, permanently, and it left behind a silence too loud to ignore. In the hours following Logan Federico's murder, law enforcement began piecing together a timeline. The break-in, the weapon, the stolen vehicle, the purchases made using her debit card. It didn't take long for a name to surface. A man already known to police. A man with a record. Alexander Dickey, 30 years old. Not a stranger to trouble. Not someone who had simply made one mistake. His background showed a pattern. Property crimes, breaking and entering, theft, illegal possession of a weapon. Charges that didn't always make headlines. But that painted a troubling picture over time. He wasn't someone lost in the system. He was known to it. Booked. Released. Booked again. On May 3rd, the same day Logan was killed, investigators say Dickey broke into another residence in the Columbia area. There, he allegedly stole a firearm and a set of car keys. Then, using that weapon and vehicle, he moved on to the Cypress Street home where Logan was staying. What was his motive? Police haven't said. Maybe he was looking for money. Maybe valuables. Maybe it was just about power, control. But this wasn't random. It wasn't spontaneous. It was a series of deliberate acts committed in sequence. After the murder, Dickey allegedly drove off in the stolen car. Over the next day, he used Logan's debit card multiple times. That car became a trail, a digital footprint investigators could follow. Every swipe, every transaction brought police closer. Then came the fire. A blaze was reported at a location believed to be connected to Dickey. Inside, authorities found burned evidence, documents, personal items, signs that someone was trying to erase their tracks. But it was too late. Police closed in, and in the days following the murder, Alexander Dickey was arrested. He now faces a list of charges: murder, first-degree burglary, possession of a weapon during a violent crime, possession of a weapon by a convicted felon, grand larceny, and unlawful use of a debit card. Prosecutors say they intend to hold him fully accountable. But accountability doesn't bring Logan back. Dickey hasn't made any public statements. There's been no apology, no explanation. His face appeared briefly in booking photos. Expression flat, eyes distant. The man accused of stealing not just property, but a human life. To some, he's just another criminal, another name in the system. But to the Federico family, he's something else. He's the reason they wake up each day to silence. He's the reason they'll never hear Logan's laugh again. He's the reason a young woman with everything ahead of her is now a memory. Who is Alexander Dickey? The answer is still unfolding in courtrooms, in case files, and in the minds of a grieving family who still doesn't understand how this could have happened. From the moment officers stepped into the rental home on Cypress Street, one thing was clear. This wasn't a crime of chance. This was targeted, swift, and deadly. Logan Federico's body lay near the front of the house. Evidence of a close-range gunshot wound to the chest. The crime scene was tense. Quiet. Officers moved methodically, collecting shell casings, photographing the layout, interviewing those still too shaken to speak clearly. But outside the walls of that house, time was working against them. The suspect was gone, and the longer he stayed out there, the harder it would be to bring him in. Detectives began building their case immediately. The house had surveillance cameras nearby. Neighbors reported seeing a man fleeing in a vehicle. And then there was a debit card. Logan's debit card was used at several locations after the murder. Gas stations, ATMs, small purchases. But each one left behind a digital marker. Police requested transaction logs. They cross-referenced timestamps with store surveillance footage. Frame by frame, they began to reconstruct the face. Alexander Dickey. Then came another tip. A break-in reported at a separate Columbia residence the same day. The victim reported stolen items: a firearm, car keys, electronics. When investigators compared the timing of the burglary with the timeline of Logan's murder, the connection became impossible to ignore. It was the same suspect. As detectives tracked Dickey's movements, they discovered one more chilling detail: a structure fire. The burned remains of personal items, some believed to belong to Dickey, were found at the scene. Among the ashes, possible evidence: paperwork, clothing, things someone might destroy if they were trying to disappear. But by then, the Columbia Police Department had their suspect identified, their warrant signed, and their strategy in motion. The arrest was executed without major incident. Dickey was taken into custody and booked at the Alvin S. Glenn Detention Center. It wasn't a dramatic chase or violent standoff. It was quiet, measured, professional, because the goal wasn't vengeance, it was justice. Logan's family was notified. Her father, Stephen Federico, released a statement thanking law enforcement. He called them heroes. For detectives, it was a rare moment of relief, but there was no celebration, no sense of victory, just the knowledge that the man accused of killing an innocent young woman was now off the street. Dickey now faces multiple felony charges. A legal process is underway. There will be hearings. There may be a trial. But whatever happens next, the facts remain: a stolen weapon, a forced entry, a young woman murdered, and an arrest that brought a small measure of accountability, if not peace, to a family still shattered by grief. Grief is not loud. It's not always screaming or wailing or collapsing to the floor. Sometimes, grief looks like a father sitting on the edge of a bed that will never be slept in again. Sometimes, It sounds like a phone that doesn't ring, a voice you'll never hear again. Sometimes it's a post on social media, one that says everything and yet not nearly enough. When Stephen Federico first spoke publicly about his daughter's death, it wasn't through a press conference or media event. It was through heartbreak. He wrote, "On Friday, May 3rd, my only daughter and best friend Logan Federico was taken from me in the most senseless and violent of ways. I could not protect her. I could not be her hero that day. She was a bright light, the most caring, beautiful, intelligent young woman. She had her whole life ahead of her and was pursuing a degree in education to teach children. She made everyone around her better. She was supposed to come home today. Instead, I will be bringing her home in a box." There is no way to soften that reality, no way to make it less brutal. Thousands read those words. Strangers, friends, classmates, fellow parents. People who had never met Logan found themselves weeping for her. And soon, her name was everywhere, not just as a victim, but as someone people wanted to remember. After the arrest of Alexander Dickey, the focus turned to the justice system. Logan Federico's name was now etched into court filings, legal motions, case numbers. In the days that followed, Dickey appeared before a judge, shackled, silent. He didn't speak much. He didn't have to. The charges spoke for him. Prosecutors laid out their position clearly. They accused Dickey of forcing his way into a home and killing a young woman who had no way to defend herself. They accused him of doing it with a stolen weapon, taken during a separate break-in earlier that day, and they accused him of using Logan's belongings, her car, her debit card, after she had already died. He was charged with murder, first-degree burglary, possession of a weapon during a violent crime, possession of a weapon by a felon, grand larceny, and fraudulent use of a financial transaction card. The bond? Denied. The state made it clear. They considered Dickey a danger to the community. For now, he remained behind bars at the Alvin S. Glenn Detention Center in Columbia, South Carolina. But this is just the beginning. The wheels of justice turn slowly. There will be motions, hearings, discovery, and possibly a trial. Prosecutors will likely pursue the maximum penalties. The murder charge alone carries the possibility of life imprisonment. Logan's family will be asked to sit in that courtroom, to listen to the details, to relive the worst night of their lives. Over and over again, her father, Stephen, may have to testify. He may have to look at the man accused of killing his daughter and tell a room full of strangers who she was, what she meant to him. There will be no justice that feels complete, no sentence long enough to make this right. But there is accountability. There is truth, and truth, when spoken plainly in a courtroom, can matter. As of now, no trial date has been announced. The investigation is still active. Evidence is still being reviewed. Dickey has not entered a formal plea. But one day soon, a jury may be asked to decide whether the evidence proves what Logan's family already knows in their hearts. That on May 3rd, 2025, a man with a gun made a choice. And that choice took away a daughter, a student, and a life that deserved so much more. There's a photo of Logan Federico, smiling, full of life, eyes lit with possibility. You wouldn't need to know her to feel something when you look at it, because what she represented was something we all understand. A daughter, a friend, a student, a person in the middle of building a life she could be proud of. She wasn't famous. She wasn't chasing headlines. She was just trying to do something good with her time on this earth. She wanted to teach children. She wanted to love and be loved. She wanted what most of us want: peace, safety, and purpose. And in an instant, that was taken from her. The violence that ended Logan's life didn't just break one family. It echoed through a community, through classrooms she never got to stand in, through the hearts of friends who still send her messages she'll never read, and through a father who wakes up every day knowing his only daughter isn't coming home. The hardest part about true crime isn't the crime itself. It's the truth that comes after. The empty seat at the dinner table, the unopened birthday cards, the absence that takes up more space than anyone can measure. Logan Federico should still be here. She should be studying for finals, planning her summer, laughing at inside jokes. Instead, Her name is now spoken in courtrooms, written into headlines, etched into memory. But if there's one thing her father has made clear, it's this: Logan will not be forgotten, not as a victim, but as a person. So remember her, not just for how she died, but for how she lived, for the joy she gave to others, for the life she was creating. Because when we speak her name with care, when we listen to people who loved her, we do the one thing violence cannot undo. We keep her alive in the way that matters most. This story is dedicated to the memory of Logan Federico and to all the families still waiting for justice. Story 2. On May 15th, 2021, the peaceful city of Tempe, Arizona, became the scene of an unimaginable tragedy. In a quiet home, where 2 children should have been safe and loved, their lives were violently and senselessly taken. Mia, just 9 years old, and Kai, only 7, were murdered by the very person who was supposed to protect them. Their mother, Yui Inoue. The brutality of the crime shocked the community, leaving families, neighbors, and even complete strangers grappling with disbelief. How could a mother, entrusted with the care and well-being of her children, commit such a horrific act? And what drove her to carry out the unthinkable? Yui Inoue's story is a tragic one marked by a web of personal struggles, emotional instability, and a breakdown that ultimately led to the senseless loss of 2 innocent lives. But what led to that moment? What happened in the hours and days leading up to that night? This is a story of how a mother's desperation and fractured mind collided with unspeakable violence, forever changing the lives of everyone involved. The victims, Mia and Kai, were just children, 2 souls who had their whole lives ahead of them. The aftermath has left the community mourning, a family forever shattered, and a woman facing the consequences of her irreversible actions. As we recount this harrowing crime, we will explore the events that unfolded that night, the investigation that ensued, and the heartbreaking trial that followed. But more than just the facts of the case, we seek to understand the forces that can push someone to cross the line into something beyond comprehension. Yui Inoue's actions left more than just a loss of life. They left unanswered questions, a fractured family, and a lasting mark on a community forever scarred. As we uncover the details of this case, we must ask, what drives someone to commit such an atrocious act? What could lead a mother to butcher her own children in cold blood? Stay with us as we piece together the tragic story of Mia and Kai's deaths and the chilling consequences for Yui Inoue, a mother whose actions will forever haunt the city of Tempe. To understand the depths of the tragedy that unfolded on May 15th, we need to look at the life of the woman at the center of it all, Yui Inoue. A 35-year-old mother of 2, she had once been an ordinary woman living in a small but comfortable home with her children, Mia and Kai. They were her world, or so it seemed. From the outside, Yui appeared to be like any other parent, loving, devoted, and caring. Yui was a mother who, like many others, tried to juggle the responsibilities of raising children while managing the challenges of everyday life. But things were far from perfect in her world. Behind the scenes, her life had started to unravel in ways that many never saw coming. There was a history of struggle that would eventually lead to an event no one could have imagined. Yui had recently gone through a messy divorce from her husband, which had left her emotionally and financially unstable. The breakup was more than just the end of marriage. It was a collapse of the foundation she had built her life on. And like many in her position, Yui was left trying to pick up the pieces of her fractured world. But instead of finding stability, she found herself sinking further into a place of isolation and despair. Her ex-husband had custody of their children part-time, which meant that Yui would often have to face long stretches of time without her kids. And while some might think that time apart could provide relief or a chance for healing, for Yui, it seemed to only magnify the sense of loneliness and inadequacy that was already consuming her. Authorities have been called to home on several occasions in the past, reporting incidents of domestic disturbances and neglect. Neighbors and even close family members noticed Yui becoming more withdrawn, agitated, and anxious. There were whispers of trouble, but nothing concrete enough to suggest that things had reached a point where something violent could erupt. Psychologists argue that what we often see in cases like this is a gradual unraveling, a slow descent into a mental state where the individual can no longer discern right from wrong. And in Yui's case, It seems that the pressure from a crumbling marriage, financial instability, and the stress of being a single mother slowly took its toll. As she dealt with the breakdown of her marriage, Yui's sense of self-worth began to deteriorate. She had no clear support system, and though she had a family, it appeared that no one truly understood the magnitude of her struggle. With each passing day, the weight of her responsibilities, her emotions, and the broken pieces of her life began to close in on her. But nothing prepared anyone for the moment when that pressure would finally give way to something far darker. On the night of May 14, 2021, Yui's mental state was pushed to its breaking point. Reports indicate that she had an argument with her ex-husband over the children, a disagreement that only heightened her feelings of anger and helplessness. That night, she spoke of hearing voices, and when morning came, it seemed she had made a decision, one that would forever alter the course of her life and the lives of those around her. Yui's children, Mia and Kai, had no idea that this would be their last morning. They woke up to a mother who had already crossed the point of no return. There was no indication that they were in danger for them. It was just another day in a life that would never unfold the way it should have. The children were innocent, caught in a situation that was beyond their control. They were young, with their whole lives ahead of them, full of promise and potential. But on this fateful day, their lives would be tragically cut short by the one person who should have loved and protected them above all else. For Yui, the night would be one of destruction, of her family, of her sanity, and of her future. What began as a normal morning would soon be a moment in time no one would forget. The tragedy was set in motion, and the community of Tempe would soon face a nightmare no one could have predicted. It was just after midnight on May 15, 2021, when Yui and Noe's house became the scene of an unimaginable horror. In the stillness of the night, while the rest of the neighborhood slept peacefully, the children in Yui's home, Mia, 9 years old, and Kai, 7, were unaware of the nightmare about to unfold. Their lives would be taken in an instant, as the love and trust they once had for their mother were violently shattered. Yui had spent the earlier part of the evening in a haze, consumed by feelings of isolation, anger, and despair. As the night wore on, her emotional state grew more erratic. She had already made the decision. The voices in her head, the overwhelming thoughts that had been building in her mind for days, months, perhaps even years, led her to this moment. The mother who once cared for her children had become something else entirely, someone capable of unspeakable violence. Yui retrieved the only weapon available to her, a heavy meat cleaver, its sharp blade gleaming in the dim light. The weapon she had once used to prepare meals now became the instrument of death. With steady hands and a cold resolve, she approached her children's bedroom. Mia and Kai slept soundly, unaware of the danger that had silently crept into their lives. At this moment, Yui's mind was clouded with a singular thought. She had to end it all. What began as an argument over custody, compounded by an endless cycle of emotional distress, had reached its climax, and now the children, her flesh and blood, would be the victims of her fractured mind. She entered the room where Mia and Kai lay in their beds, oblivious to the danger. Without warning, she swung the cleaver down upon her son. The blow was swift and brutal. Kai, who had barely begun to understand the world around him, never stood a chance. Mia, startled by the noise, awoke just in time to witness the horror. But it was too late. Yui, in a rage and overwhelmed by her mental state, turned the cleaver upon her daughter, delivering the fatal blows with no hesitation, no remorse. In that moment, Mia and Kai's lives were violently extinguished, their bodies left lifeless in place where they should have felt the safest. Yui stood over their bodies, the gruesome reality of what she had just done sinking in. But even as the weight of her actions began to settle upon her, she didn't stop. She moved through the house in a daze, cleaning up the blood and attempting to hide what had happened. A mother who had killed her children now tried to erase the traces of her crime. But there was no escaping the reality of what she had done. As she cleaned the scene, Yui's mind was already unraveling. She continued to act out of compulsion, as if she could somehow undo the horror she had just committed. But the brutal truth remained. 2 children were dead, and there was no way to hide it. She couldn't hide from herself, nor from the consequences that were now inevitable. Within hours, neighbors would begin to notice the odd behavior. Yui acting strangely, her movements erratic, as if she were lost in a haze of confusion and guilt. The police were called, not by Yui, but by concerned neighbors who had witnessed her strange actions. Officers arrived to find a mother in a state of denial, her children's bodies still lying cold in their beds. When law enforcement entered the house, they were confronted with a scene beyond comprehension. The children's bodies were discovered in their beds, covered in blood, their lives taken so violently and senselessly. Yui was arrested on the spot, her hands covered in the same blood that stained the home she had once shared with her children. As Yui was taken into custody, her expression was vacant, almost as if she were still in a state of shock, unable to fully process what had just transpired. It was clear she didn't understand the gravity of her actions, and yet, in the aftermath, it would become painfully clear to everyone around her. The murder of Mia and Kai Inoue would go down as one of the most devastating crimes in the history of Tempe. The lives of two innocent children, whose only crime was trusting the woman who had given birth to them, had been taken in the most horrific of ways. And their mother, the one person they should have been able to rely on, was the one who ended it all. As the days passed and the investigation unfolded, the city of Tempe was left to grapple with a question that everyone was asking. Why? What had driven Yui Inoue to kill her own children? And how could such a thing happen in a place that was once filled with hope, promise, and love? After the grisly discovery of Mia and Kai's bodies, law enforcement quickly took control of the scene. The house, once filled with the sounds of children's laughter, now stood silent, the weight of the tragedy hanging heavy in the air. As detectives entered the home, they immediately recognized the horror they were confronting. The brutal killings were not random. This was no home invasion or act of passion. This was the murder of two innocent children, executed by their own mother. The investigation began in the early hours of May 15th, with a team of detectives working tirelessly to piece together the events leading up to the murders. Evidence from the scene was crucial. Blood spattered across the bedroom, the cleaver lying in plain sight. The weapon of choice was stark, but it told a story of calculated violence. And yet, the most haunting aspect of all was the mother, Yui Inoue, who remained eerily calm as the authorities questioned her. When Yui was taken into custody, her demeanor was unsettling. She appeared detached, as if in a trance, unable or unwilling to fully process what she had done. During her initial interviews, she showed little emotion, giving short, unclear answers when questioned about the murders. She was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, but investigators knew that there was more to the story than just the cold facts of the crime scene. Psychologists later speculated that Yui's inability to express emotion or remorse during the interrogation was indicative of her fragile mental state. Reports surfaced of her long-standing emotional instability, her battles with depression, and the toll her divorce had taken on her. But could this justify the brutal slaughter of her children? Could her mental health issues explain away the unthinkable actions she had taken? As the investigation progressed, more details about Yui's life began to surface. Detectives learned that Yui had been struggling with severe mental health issues for some time. Neighbors and family members revealed that she had isolated herself and exhibited signs of erratic behavior leading up to the murders. But despite these warning signs, no one had foreseen the tragic event that would unfold in the early hours of that morning. The public outcry was swift and intense. The horror of what had occurred in the quiet suburban home of Tempe reverberated across the nation. Parents everywhere found themselves grappling with the incomprehensible. How could a mother, someone who should have been a child's greatest protector, commit such a horrific act? The case quickly became the subject of nationwide media coverage, with the eyes of the world now focused on the investigation and the impending trial. Months passed before the case made it to court, but the questions surrounding Yui's actions only grew louder. On one hand, Yui was a mother who had clearly snapped under the immense pressure of her fractured life. On the other, the brutality of her actions could not be ignored. As the trial approached, the key issue was clear. Could Yui be held fully accountable for the murders, or would her mental health history be seen as a mitigating factor? Legal experts and psychologists debated whether Yui was legally insane at the time of the murders. The defense team built their case around the idea that Yui had experienced a psychotic break brought on by years of emotional instability, and the pressure of her personal circumstances. They argued that she was not in control of her actions when she killed Mia and Kai, but the prosecution countered, asserting that Yui had a clarity of mind to commit the crime, and the brutality of the murders suggested premeditation. During the trial, shocking details emerged. Evidence showed that Yui had attempted to clean the crime scene after the murders, showing a level of awareness that contradicted her defense's claims of insanity. Furthermore, investigators uncovered a series of disturbing social media posts and text messages from Yui, some expressing feelings of anger and hopelessness, while others revealed her deep love for her children. This complex juxtaposition between her love for her kids and the violence she inflicted upon them left jurors, lawyers, and the public struggling to understand the truth behind her actions. As the prosecution presented its case, they painted a chilling picture of a woman who, despite her personal struggles, had made a clear choice to end her children's lives. The brutality of the murders left no room for doubt in the minds of many. This was not a spontaneous act. It was a cold, calculated decision that ultimately cost Mia and Kai their lives. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated on Yui's fate. The question before them was whether Yui in no way, a mother who had killed her own children, could be held responsible for her actions. Was she a woman driven to madness by years of emotional pain? Or was she simply a criminal who deserved to be punished for her unspeakable crime? On November 1st, 2021, after careful consideration, the jury reached its verdict. Yui Inoue was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. The courtroom was filled with emotion as the families of the victims and the community who had followed the case awaited the sentence. Yui's conviction was a powerful statement that no matter the struggles or mental state of an individual, there are consequences when an innocent life is taken. Yui Inoue was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. It was a sentence that would never bring Mia and Kai back, but it served as a reminder that justice, though delayed, had finally been served. The lives of 2 children had been cut short in the most violent of ways. And while Yui Inoue's mental state played a role in understanding the tragedy, it could never erase the pain, loss, and destruction she had caused. In the aftermath, the community of Tempe held vigils and memorials for Mia and Kai, honoring their short lives and remembering them as they were. 2 children with hopes, dreams, and potential who had been denied a future by the very person who should have cherished them the most. To understand the brutality of Yui Inoue's actions, we must first attempt to understand the woman herself. What led her to commit the unthinkable? Was she a woman pushed beyond the limits of her mental health? Or did something far darker reside beneath the surface? As we examine Yui's psychological profile, we will explore the complex web of personal trauma, mental illness, and emotional instability that may have contributed to the tragic deaths of her children. Yui Inoue was not always a woman defined by violence. Like many, she once had dreams, aspirations, and a sense of hope for her future. Born into a family that appeared functional from the outside, Yui's early years were marked by academic success and a seemingly normal childhood. Yet, beneath the surface, there were signs of emotional strain, subtle, perhaps unnoticed by those around her. As we dig deeper into Yui's background, it becomes clear that her mental health struggles may have been present long before the murders. Reports from friends, family, and even co-workers suggest a long history of emotional instability, an ongoing battle with feelings of inadequacy, isolation, and depression that went largely unaddressed. Yui's isolation began early. Her relationships were fraught with tension, marked by periods of emotional volatility. A key turning point came when Yui's marriage dissolved. The pain of divorce and the stress of raising 2 young children alone began to weigh heavily on her. She sought therapy sporadically, but never seemed able to resolve the internal turmoil that simmered beneath the surface. As time went on, these struggles escalated. It's believed that Yui's failure to sustain consistent therapy or seek appropriate treatment contributed to a worsening of her mental health. Without the proper care, her unresolved trauma and anxiety morphed into something more dangerous, an overwhelming sense of helplessness and despair. In her mind, the weight of the world seemed to press down upon her more with each passing day. On her social media, Yui's posts reflected a person torn between love for her children and frustration with her circumstances. She shared moments of joy, but also messages filled with bitterness and pain. Her online persona seemed to convey a person trapped in an emotional battle, her anguish spilling over in small, cryptic messages. Psychologists who studied Yui's behavior post-arrest suggested that she may have been experiencing a form of depression, a clinical condition marked by persistent sadness, feelings of worthlessness, and a loss of interest in everyday activities. Depression often distorts reality, leading individuals to feel disconnected from their surroundings and, in some cases, to act in ways they might not otherwise. But depression alone did not account for her horrific actions. Yui's situation also bore the hallmarks of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. The trauma of her failed marriage, compounded by the loss of stability, led her to adopt maladaptive coping mechanisms. PTSD often manifests as violent outbursts, emotional numbness, and severe anxiety. Yet, in Yui's case, it was clear that her emotional distress was compounded by something much deeper, a psychotic episode. Psychosis is a severe mental health condition that can cause an individual to lose touch with reality. They may experience delusions, hallucinations, and irrational thinking. In Yui's case, there's reason to believe that she might have suffered from a brief psychotic disorder. The stress from her tumultuous personal life, coupled with unaddressed emotional pain, could have triggered a psychotic break, causing her to act in a manner that was entirely out of character for her. The choice of a meat cleaver, a tool once used for everyday tasks, illustrated the disturbing nature of her psychosis. It was not an impulsive act. It was calculated, premeditated. This suggests that, despite her psychological state, Yui's actions were not entirely the result of a loss of reality. She knew what she was doing, but in her mind, she was trapped in a cycle of emotional despair, unable to break free. Yui's emotional suppression became a dangerous weapon. Psychologists argue that individuals like her often repress their emotions until they reach a breaking point. When the pressure becomes too much and the internal struggle becomes unbearable, their coping mechanisms can become dangerously destructive. In Yui's case, this moment of violence was a culmination of years of unresolved trauma. As the trial unfolded, psychological evaluations were key to understanding whether Yui could be held fully responsible for her actions. The defense leaned heavily on her mental health history, arguing that she was experiencing a psychotic episode when she killed her children. They presented evidence of her psychiatric history, suggesting that her mind had fractured under the stress of her life's pressures. But could mental illness be an excuse for the calculated, horrific nature of her crime? The prosecution, however, maintained that while Yui's mental state was certainly a factor, it didn't absolve her of responsibility. They argued that Yui's actions showed a disturbing level of awareness. Her attempt to clean up the crime scene and hide evidence suggested that she understood what she had done and the consequences of it. The evidence painted a portrait of a woman who, despite her emotional turmoil, had enough clarity to make a conscious choice. In the end, the trial would come down to a central question. Was Yui Inoue suffering from a mental illness so severe that she was unable to understand the enormity of her actions, or was she simply a mother who, despite her emotional pain, chose to commit murder? Experts who studied Yui after her arrest pointed to the complexity of her condition. They suggested that Yui's actions may have been the result of both a severe psychological disorder and a fundamental failure to seek help when she needed it most. The combination of untreated mental illness, emotional instability, and the immense strain of her personal life may have created the perfect storm, a moment in time when her pain reached a breaking point. The psychological profile of Yui Inoue is complex, layered with years of unaddressed trauma, emotional isolation, and mental illness. While her defense team argued for diminished capacity, the jury had to reckon with the fact that 2 innocent lives were lost. Mia and Kai's deaths were a tragic reminder of the devastating consequences of untreated mental illness and the pain it can inflict on not only the individual, but those around them. In the end, while we may never fully understand what drove Yui to commit such a violent act, one thing remains certain: mental health, when left untreated, can become a silent killer capable of destroying lives in ways we never thought possible. The community of Tempe, Arizona, was forever changed in the wake of Yui Inoue's horrific actions. This was a neighborhood that had known peace, where children played in the yards and families gathered for barbecues. The murder of Mia and Kai in no way shattered the illusion of safety, leaving behind a ripple of grief, confusion, and above all, heartbreak. For many, the event was unfathomable. How could a mother someone they thought they knew, commit such an atrocity. Neighbors who had once shared casual conversations at the mailbox now found themselves grappling with the unimaginable. They described Yui as quiet, often keeping to herself, but there was nothing in her behavior that could have indicated the depth of the tragedy that would unfold. For many, the hardest part was reconciling the image of a mother who had once cared for her children with the woman who took their lives. For one neighbor, the shock was overwhelming. She described Yui as a mother who, while distant, appeared to be doing her best for her children. The news of the killings left the community reeling, with many unable to comprehend the brutality of the act. The images of two young children, their lives cut short by the person they should have trusted the most, would stay with them forever. As news of the crime spread, the shock waves hit the local police force as well. Officers who worked countless cases in their careers described this one as particularly difficult. There was no escaping the haunting reality of a mother turning on her own flesh and blood. In a city where violent crimes were rare, this case left an indelible mark. Within hours, local media outlets were saturated with coverage of the case. The headline was shocking enough to make even the most seasoned reporters pause. Tempe mother arrested for brutally killing her children. As more details emerged, the local news stations worked overtime to provide updates, interviewing neighbors, police officers, and experts in criminal psychology. The city, still grappling with the enormity of the crime, found itself thrust into the spotlight. The media's portrayal of Yui quickly became a focal point. Was she simply a mother pushed to her limits, overwhelmed by personal pain? Or was there something deeper and more chilling at play? The story captivated the public's imagination and triggered a fierce debate. How could someone who had once been a caretaker, protector, turn into a cold-blooded killer? Was this the result of mental illness? Or was it a choice, one that ultimately cost her children their lives? People want to make sense of these kinds of crimes. They want to know why a mother would hurt her children. And it's much easier for the public to label the act as one of madness, a break from reality, because it helps to alleviate the discomfort of understanding that a mother could commit such an act of violence. But when we delve deeper, we see a complicated picture: emotional distress, untreated mental illness, and a person who may have lost control of their emotions and actions. In the wake of the crime, the community sought ways to cope. A vigil was held in memory of Mia and Kai, where residents gathered to honor the lives of the children they had lost. In a place where neighbors had once been strangers, people now stood together in their shared grief. The vigil was a quiet testament to the impact the tragedy had on those who had known Mia and Kai. However, briefly, parents in the area expressed their shock and sorrow. For them, the murder of Mia and Kai was a painful reminder of how fragile life can be. They couldn't shake the thought that it could have been their own children. How quickly the lives of the innocent can be stolen. Some expressed concern about the hidden dangers lurking behind the doors of seemingly ordinary homes, where domestic violence and emotional instability can manifest in deadly ways. While the community wrestled with its grief, the media delved deep into Yui's personal life, eager to piece together a narrative. They explored her background, her failed marriage, her mental health history, and her struggles with depression and isolation. Journalists sought to understand the why, probing into the circumstances that might have contributed to the tragic deaths of Mia and Kai. True crime enthusiasts across the country latched onto the case, dissecting every detail, in podcasts and on social media. Yui's story became the subject of endless debate. Was she a victim of her circumstances, a woman too broken to cope with the pressures of life, or was she a cold-blooded killer who saw no other way out? The case became an emotional tug-of-war as public opinion shifted between sympathy and condemnation. As the trial began, the media frenzy only intensified. Cameras lined the courthouse, capturing every moment of proceedings. Journalists reported on the ongoing testimony, dissecting the arguments presented by both the defense and the prosecution. The public, drawn into the drama of the trial, watched eagerly as they awaited a verdict. Would Yui be held accountable for her actions, or would her mental health be seen as a mitigating factor? Online, the case sparked a heated debate. People on social media platforms expressed outrage, sorrow, and confusion. Some argued that Yui's mental illness was an important factor to consider, while others insisted that no explanation could justify the loss of two young lives. The constant chatter on Twitter, Facebook, and Reddit painted a portrait of a divided nation, one where the complexity of mental health issues and violent crime collided in a case that defied simple answers. The media's role in the aftermath was not just to report the facts, but to help the world make sense of the loss. As they covered the case, they provided the public with a window into the lives of Mia and Kai, reminding everyone that beyond the headlines, these were real children with real families who would never recover from the pain of their loss. Ultimately, the reactions from the community and the media left an indelible mark on the case. The tragedy of Mia and Kai's deaths is not just a story of crime and punishment. It is also a story of grief, confusion, and a deep question that arises when a mother, someone who should have been their protector, becomes the perpetrator. The case of Yui in no way will continue to haunt the memories of those who lived through it, a reminder of the destructive power of mental illness and the fragility of innocence. The story of Yui in no way is one that continues to haunt the minds of those who followed it. A mother who, once filled with love and hope, descended into a nightmarish reality, a reality where the lives of her two children, Mia and Kai, were violently stolen away. But beyond the shock of the crime, what does this case truly reveal about the fragility of the human mind and the destructive power of untreated mental illness? At the heart of this tragedy lies a stark reminder of how mental health, when left unchecked, can spiral into unimaginable consequences. Yui's descent into emotional turmoil and psychological instability is a tragic example of the dangers posed by untreated mental illness. Her inability to cope with her personal demons ultimately led her to take the lives of the people she loved most, her children. And while we can never truly understand the complexity of her thoughts in those final moments, we can attempt to grasp the broader implications of this devastating event. In the aftermath, the community was left to grapple with their grief and confusion. The faces of Mia and Kai, two innocent children, serve as a constant reminder of the emotional toll taken on families who struggle with mental illness. The tragedy left an indelible mark on the hearts of those who knew the children, as well as those who followed the case from afar. It became a symbol of how a single tragic event can reshape an entire community. One of the critical lessons we must take from this case is the importance of mental health awareness and intervention. Mental health disorders, particularly in the form of depression, PTSD, and psychosis, often go untreated, either due to a lack of access to care or the stigma surrounding these issues. Had Yui received the proper care, perhaps the outcome would have been different. We must begin to ask ourselves, how can we better support those who are suffering before it's too late? Prevention and early intervention are key. Yui's story highlights a critical failure in the system that could have helped her, whether through consistent mental health care, support networks, or simply more understanding from those around her. But the truth is, we will never truly know what went through her mind in those final moments, or what led her to believe that the horrific act she committed was her only option. The legal system, too, struggled with the question of accountability. While Yui's mental state played a central role in the trial, the public was divided. Was she a victim of her circumstances, a woman so consumed by her emotional turmoil that she lost touch with reality? Or was she a calculated murderer who should be held fully responsible for her actions? The jury's decision to convict Yui in no way was a testament to the gravity of her crime, but also raised important questions about the role of mental illness in criminal responsibility. As Yui's case continues to reverberate through the legal and mental health communities, it serves as a poignant reminder that the line between compassion and accountability is not always clear. How do we balance empathy for those suffering from mental illness with the need to protect society from the consequences of their actions? It is a question that will continue to spark debate as we try to make sense of tragedy that defies easy answers. Mia and Kai's lives were filled with potential, with dreams and possibilities that were stolen from them far too soon. In the blink of an eye, everything they knew was taken. They will never get the chance to grow up, to laugh, to experience the world around them. For the families left behind, the pain of their loss will never fade. Ultimately, the case of Yui Inoue is not just a story about a woman who took the lives of her children. It is a story about the fragility of the human mind, the power of untreated trauma, and the devastating consequences that can result when emotional and mental struggles are ignored. It serves as a stark warning of how far-reaching the effects of untreated mental illness can be not just for the individual, but for those around them. And while justice has been served in this case, the pain of loss remains, both for the community and the family who will never forget Mia and Kai. As we reflect on this tragic case, we are reminded that mental health must be taken seriously, that early intervention is crucial, and that we must never forget the importance of supporting those who are struggling before it's too late. This has been a story of Yui in no way, a case of love lost, pain unleashed, and a tragic, irreversible act that forever altered the lives of all those involved. Story 3. He was once known for his time on the football field, a former tight end with raw talent, power, and presence. Kevin Ware Jr. played in the NFL, where discipline, teamwork, and respect were supposed to be part of the game. But long after the crowd stopped cheering, his life took a turn no one expected. Taylor Pomaski was 29 years old. She was intelligent, warm, and full of life. To those who knew her best, she was generous, funny, and always trying to help others, even when it meant putting herself second. Her friends described her as someone who lit up a room. Her family just wanted her safe. But by the time anyone realized how much danger she was in, it was already too late. On April 25th, 2021, Taylor was last seen leaving a party with Kevin Ware. That night marked the beginning of a long stretch of silence. She stopped responding to texts. She didn't call her parents. She missed birthdays. She missed everything. For 7 months, no one knew where she was, only that something was terribly wrong. Kevin Ware claimed he didn't know where she had gone. He gave statements, made excuses, kept moving. But there were gaps in his story, inconsistencies, and a past that raised serious questions. Before Taylor vanished, there were already signs that she was trying to leave the relationship, signs that things were not okay. Taylor had reportedly told friends she was scared. She'd reached out for help. She'd taken steps to distance herself. But leaving someone like Kevin Ware, someone with a history of control and aggression, wasn't easy. This case wasn't just about a missing woman. It was about the fear she lived with, the moment she was unheard, and the consequences of systems that often fail to protect victims when it matters most. Taylor was more than a name in a headline. She was someone's daughter, someone's friend, and she deserved more than what she got. As weeks turned into months, her loved ones clung to hope. But in December 2021, their worst fears were confirmed when human remains were found in a remote area of Harris County, Texas. It took time for DNA to confirm what many already suspected. Taylor Pomaski would never come home. The man she trusted, the man once celebrated on the football field, would eventually be charged with her murder. It would take 3 years, a mountain of evidence, and a courtroom packed with grief before Kevin Ware admitted to what he had done. In 2024, Ware pleaded guilty to murdering Taylor and tampering with her body. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison. But for those who knew Taylor, no number could ever represent justice. The time she lost, the life she was building, and the pain left behind, it was immeasurable. This is not just a story about a crime. It's about power, control, silence, and the cost of waiting too long to act. It's about who gets believed, who gets protected, and what happens when they don't. In this episode, we'll trace Taylor's story from the beginning, from her early life to the final days she was seen. We'll examine the relationship, the warning signs, the investigation, and the final resolution in court. Most importantly, we'll remember who she was and why her story still matters. Because Taylor Pomaski didn't disappear. She was taken. And now, it's time to understand how and why, before the headlines, before the arrest, before the search for answers. There were 2 lives heading in very different directions until they crossed paths. Kevin Ware Jr. was born in San Diego, California in 1980. Standing 6'3" with the build and skill to play tight end, Ware was a standout athlete. He played college football at the University of Washington before transferring to University of Louisiana at Lafayette. In 2003, he made it to the NFL as an undrafted free agent. For a brief moment, it looked like he had found his place on the national stage. Ware played for the Washington Redskins and later for the San Francisco 49ers. His career wasn't long, only 16 games in total, but it was enough to put his name out there, enough to open doors, enough to build a future. But that future never fully materialized. By 2004, he was out of the league, and whatever discipline football had given him, it didn't carry over into the years that followed, after football, where his life moved through a pattern of instability and arrests. His criminal history included charges for burglary, drug possession, evading arrest, and assault. Court records painted a picture of someone who struggled with anger, control, and authority. Someone whose life, once full of opportunity, had veered off course. Taylor Pomaski grew up in the Houston area. She was 29 years old at the time of her disappearance. To those who loved her, Taylor was more than the bright smile captured in photographs. She was loyal, empathetic, and always trying to do better for herself and for people around her. Friends say she had a trusting heart, sometimes too trusting. She believed in people, even when they gave her reasons not to. And when she met Kevin Ware, she didn't see the red flags that others would come to recognize. She saw someone who had been through a lot, someone who maybe just needed a second chance. It's not clear exactly when Taylor and Kevin began dating, but by 2020, they were publicly in a relationship. On the surface, it may have seemed like a new chapter for both of them, but those close to Taylor noticed changes. She became more withdrawn. She was seen less often. Some friends said she seemed tense, anxious, like she was walking on edge. There were arguments, loud ones, public ones. One former partner of Taylor's told investigators that she had recently reached out, expressing fear for her safety. That same ex-boyfriend would later help highlight just how worried she had become in the weeks before she disappeared. Kevin Ware's past didn't stay in the past. In March of 2021, just a month before Taylor vanished, Ware was arrested in Montgomery County, Texas, during a routine traffic stop. Police found cocaine, methamphetamine, marijuana, and loaded firearms in the vehicle. He was released on bond, a decision that would later be heavily scrutinized. Despite his arrest, he returned home, and Taylor stayed. Whether out of fear, hope, or something between, she remained in a relationship. By April, she was preparing to leave. That much is clear from the messages she sent and the people she contacted. Taylor wanted a fresh start. But breaking away wasn't just emotional. It was dangerous. The relationship wasn't just difficult. It was volatile. It was threatening. And for Taylor, it was nearing its end. On April 25th, 2021, Taylor attended a party at her home with Kevin. That night would be the last time she was seen alive. Understanding who Taylor Pomaski was and who Kevin Ware had become is crucial, because this isn't just a story of a crime. It's the story of how patterns of abuse escalate, how charm can mask harm, and how too often help comes when it's already too late. To understand what happened to Taylor Pomaski, we have to look beyond the surface of her relationship with Kevin Ware, because this wasn't just a romance that fell apart. It was a relationship marked by fear, instability, and a slow erosion of safety. When Taylor first met Kevin, it's likely she saw something redeemable in him. People who knew her say she believed in giving others a chance. And for someone like Kevin Ware, a man who had once been on a national stage and had since fallen out of the spotlight, that belief may have felt comforting, even empowering. But there was a gap between the man Kevin represented the world and the one Taylor lived with day to day. Friends noticed Taylor becoming more distant, less vibrant. Some say she began to isolate. Her demeanor changed. She wasn't herself. And though she tried to keep her struggles private, cracks began to show. There were fights, loud ones. Neighbors reported hearing shouting. Friends said Taylor began to express concern about Kevin's temper. But like many in abusive relationships, she tried to navigate it quietly, hoping things might improve. One friend said Taylor had a hard time walking away because she wanted to help Kevin. She thought maybe she could be the one to help him turn things around. But the more she stayed, the more she disappeared into his world, and the harder it became to find her way out. Kevin had a history of violence. He had past charges that included assault. There were stories, moments of control, of rage, of fear. This wasn't just about two people having issues. It was about one person trying to dominate the other. In March 2021, just a month before Taylor vanished, Kevin was arrested with multiple drugs and loaded weapons in his car. This should have been a moment of reckoning. But after bonding out, he returned home, and Taylor remained by his side. It's unclear whether she felt she had no choice or whether she still hoped things could change. What we do know is that she was making plans. Quiet ones. Plans to leave. Shortly before she disappeared, Taylor reached out to people she hadn't spoken to in a while. She told an ex-boyfriend she was scared. She was trying to get away. She was trying to be careful. Her messages weren't dramatic. They were measured, calculated. She knew what she was dealing with. April 25th, 2021 began as a normal day. That night, Taylor and Kevin attended a small gathering at their home in Spring, Texas. Witnesses later said they saw them arguing. Some said the fight turned physical. One person claimed Taylor had a black eye just days earlier. After the party, Taylor was never seen again. Kevin Ware told different stories to different people. He said she left on her own, that she just walked out, but her phone went dead. Her social media activity stopped. Her dog was left behind. None of it added up. Taylor Pomaski didn't just vanish. She was trying to escape something dangerous, and something dangerous refused to let her go. This wasn't a case of miscommunication. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a relationship that had turned into a trap. And April 25th, 2021. It was a Sunday in Spring, Texas, a quiet suburban area just north of Houston. Taylor Pomaski's home was the site of a small gathering. Friends and acquaintances came by for what appeared to be a casual evening. Food, drinks, music on the surface. It wasn't out of the ordinary, but something wasn't right that night. People at the gathering later described tension between Taylor and Kevin Ware. The kind of tension that fills a room even when no one is speaking. Some said they argued. Others said it turned physical. At least one person claimed that by the end of the evening, Taylor looked scared. Those who were close to Taylor had seen this before. It wasn't the first time she and Kevin had fought in front of others, but this time felt different. The mood shifted, and after the party ended, Taylor was never seen again. In the days that followed, there were no calls, no texts, no updates on social media. She didn't show up to appointments. She didn't return messages. Her family grew concerned almost immediately. Taylor wasn't someone who vanished without telling anyone. She was close with her parents. She had plans, and those plans didn't include disappearing. When her mother couldn't get in touch with her, she reported her missing. The official report was filed with the Harris County Sheriff's Office in early May, just days after that party. From the beginning, investigators knew time was critical. The first 48 hours in any missing persons case are the most important. But Taylor was already beyond that window. Officers spoke with Kevin Ware. He told them Taylor had left the house after the argument and never came back. He claimed she had walked off. No clear destination, no explanation. It was a story that felt too easy, too clean. And as investigators started digging, nothing about his version of events held up. Taylor's belongings were still at the house. Her dog, which she loved deeply, had been left behind. Her phone had stopped transmitting data. There was no sign of activity on her bank card, her email, or her social media accounts. For someone supposedly planning to leave and start fresh, she had taken none of the things she would have needed. Friends of Taylor started organizing. They handed out flyers. They posted on Facebook and Instagram. Some of them canvassed a neighborhood, hoping someone had seen something. A car, a person, a sound in the night. But there were no witnesses, no surveillance footage, no answers. As the weeks dragged on, public interest began to grow. News outlets picked up the story. Online forums lit up with theories, but investigators were stuck. They had no crime scene, no body, no proof of what had happened. Still, their attention kept circling back to Kevin Ware. While Taylor's loved ones were begging for answers, Kevin was spiraling in a different direction. He had already been out on bond from his drug and weapons arrest in March. And in June, just 2 months after Taylor disappeared, he was arrested again, this time for violating the terms of that bond. Officers found drugs, cash, and weapons, a loaded AK-47 and a 9mm pistol, where was taken into custody. But even behind bars, he said nothing about Taylor. Authorities believed Ware knew more than he was saying. They believed she hadn't just walked away. But suspicion was enough. They needed something concrete. The investigation ramped up. Authorities searched areas near Ware's residence. They brought in cadaver dogs. They interviewed anyone who had been at the party that night. But nothing broke the case open. For Taylor's family, the silence was agonizing. Every day without information felt like another day stolen. They held on to hope, but deep down, they began preparing for the possibility that she wasn't coming back. Then, in December 2021, 7 months after she disappeared, everything changed. Human remains were found in a remote area of northern Harris County. The location was rural, difficult to access, and far from where Taylor had last been seen. It took time to confirm the identity, but when the results came back, there was no question. It was her. Taylor Pomaski was no longer missing. She had been found. But now the case shifted from a search to a homicide investigation. The discovery of her body reignited public scrutiny and law enforcement pressure. It raised one question louder than all the rest. Why had Kevin been free in the first place? By this point, he was already in custody on unrelated charges. But now, authorities had what they needed to move forward. Taylor hadn't disappeared. She had died, and the person responsible hadn't just stayed quiet. He had gone on with his life as if nothing had happened. For months, Taylor's story had existed in fragments. Sightings, messages, memories. Now it had a location, and it had evidence. The investigation was no longer chasing shadows. It was chasing justice. 7 months. That's how long Taylor Pomaski was missing before authorities made a grim discovery in northern Harris County, Texas. It was December 10th, 2021, when investigators were led to a remote area, not by coincidence, but by careful work. The location wasn't easily accessible. A stretch of land off a dirt road, surrounded by overgrowth. It wasn't the kind of place you'd stumble upon. It was the kind of place someone chooses when they don't want to be found. Human remains were recovered. There was no immediate announcement. No press release confirming identity. For weeks, the Harris County Institute of Forensic Sciences worked quietly, examining the skeletal remains. Identifying a body in that condition takes time and patience, especially when months of exposure have stripped away the surface details investigators typically rely on. It wasn't until April 2022, 4 months later, that officials publicly confirmed what Taylor's family had already feared. The remains belonged to Taylor Pomaski. For her loved ones, it was the worst kind of closure. There would be no miracle return, no dramatic reunion, just confirmation of what their hearts already knew. Taylor was gone, and someone had tried very hard to make sure no one would ever know what happened to her. Once the remains were identified, the case was no longer a missing persons investigation. It was now a homicide. The question wasn't what happened, but how and who was responsible. Though Taylor's body had been reduced to bone, forensic scientists were able to learn critical details. The remains showed evidence of blunt force trauma. Her injuries suggested a violent death. There was no sign that she died peacefully. No indication she simply wandered off and succumbed to the elements. This was not an accident. It was a killing, and in the eyes of investigators, one person had both the motive and the opportunity. Kevin Ware Jr. By this point, Ware was already sitting in jail on unrelated charges. But now, the weight of Taylor's death began closing in. Authorities pieced together what they could: the volatile relationship, the violent arguments, the witnesses from the party, the abrupt disappearance, the lack of communication, the past abuse, and now, the recovery of her body, hidden far from where she was last seen. It formed a picture, one that prosecutors believed was damning. Still, forensic evidence would be critical in strengthening the case. Investigators began building their timeline. They tracked phone data, analyzed tower pings, and reconstructed movements. They examined text messages and calls sent in the days before and after Taylor vanished. Patterns emerged, patterns that pointed toward premeditation. Search warrants were executed, digital records reviewed, witnesses re-interviewed, and each new detail brought law enforcement closer to the truth they suspected all along. The location where Taylor was found became a focal point. Who had access to that land? Who had reason to go there? Who would have known it existed? The answers circle back to one name again and again, Kevin Ware Jr. But knowing something and proving in court are two very different things. Investigators weren't just looking for motive. They needed forensic connections, items found at the remains, trace evidence, potential DNA, anything that could put Kevin Ware in that exact place at that exact time. Though much of the physical evidence had deteriorated due to weather and time, enough remained to support their theory. Taylor had been killed shortly after that party on April 25th, and her body had been hidden with intention. Taylor didn't just vanish. She didn't walk away. She didn't leave by choice. She was silenced, buried, forgotten, until investigators refused to stop looking. This moment, the identification of Taylor's body, shifted the case permanently. It gave voice to the silence Kevin Ware had tried to maintain, and it gave prosecutors the leverage they needed to make a move that had been months in the making. The charge would be murder. The trial would follow. But justice was now on the table. By the time authorities confirmed the remains as Taylor Pomaski, Kevin Ware Jr. had already been in custody for nearly a year. But that wasn't because of her disappearance. Ware was being held on unrelated charges, stemming from a traffic stop in April 2021, just weeks before Taylor vanished. Deputies had found drugs, cash, and loaded firearms in his vehicle, including an AK-47 and a 9mm pistol. He had been out on bond at the time, a free man with a criminal history, and now a fresh set of felony charges. In June 2021, he violated the terms of his bond, and the judge ordered him back to jail. It was a technicality that brought him in, not a murder charge. Not yet, but all that was about to change. Once Taylor's remains were positively identified and her death ruled a homicide, prosecutors moved swiftly. In July 2022, a Montgomery County grand jury indicted Kevin Ware Jr. on 2 charges: murder and tamper with evidence, specifically a human corpse. The indictment didn't mince words. Prosecutors believed Ware had killed Taylor, then knowingly concealed and disposed of her body. And now, he wasn't just a former NFL player with a criminal record. He was a murder defendant, one whose violent past was finally catching up to him. Ware pleaded not guilty. His legal team insisted he had nothing to do with Taylor's death. They claimed the evidence was circumstantial, that there was no proof placing him at the site where her remains were found. They tried to cast doubt, not just on the prosecution's timeline, but on his ability to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. But prosecutors had more than a theory. They had a pattern. Ware's history of violence was no secret. Over the years, he'd been charged multiple times with assault, evading arrest, and possession of controlled substances. His temper, his volatility, it was all part of the record. This wasn't a man accused for the first time. It was a man whose aggression had only escalated. As the legal process unfolded, new details emerged. Witnesses were called. Some spoke of the fight at the party on April 25th, the last time Taylor was seen. Others described past abuse, bruises, screaming, things they had noticed but hadn't reported. It was a haunting chorus of hindsight, people putting the pieces together too late. Ware's attorneys tried to suppress certain evidence. They argued that some of the testimonies were hearsay, that too much time had passed, that emotions were clouding the case. But the court allowed the case to proceed. It would take months of pre-trial hearings, motions, and delays before any resolution would come. Then, in April 2024, more than 2 years after Taylor's remains were discovered, Kevin Ware Jr. made a decision that would finally bring an end to the courtroom drama. He changed his plea, guilty, in a Harris County courtroom, Ware admitted to murdering Taylor Pomaski and tampering with her corpse. It was a stunning, yet sobering moment. There was no trial, no jury, no testimony, just a cold admission from the man who had once denied it all. He was sentenced to 40 years in prison, a punishment that many felt was deserved, but not necessarily satisfying, because no sentence could undo what had been done. No number of years could restore what Taylor's family had lost. Still, there was meaning in the outcome. For Taylor's parents, it meant accountability. For her friends, it meant truth. For the community that had followed the case so closely, it meant the silence was finally broken. Kevin Ware Jr. would never again walk free. He had taken a life, tried to hide it, lied, evaded. But the system, despite its delays, its gaps, its moments of failure, had caught up in the end. Justice was slow, but it arrived. After the cameras faded and the courtroom emptied, Taylor Pomaski's story didn't end. It changed. It became something heavier, a legacy forged in grief and unanswered questions. Her loved ones were left to pick up the pieces of a life interrupted. Taylor's parents, Eric and Leslie, had spent months pleading for answers, holding out hope, enduring silence. When Kevin Ware finally confessed, it brought clarity, but not peace. There's no peace in knowing your daughter's last moments were filled with fear. There's no comfort in hearing that the man she trusted most was the one who ended her life. Still, the confession mattered. It allowed them to begin the slow process of mourning, without wondering, without asking if she might come through the door one day, without waking up hoping it had all been a mistake. Taylor's friends shared memories, photos, stories. They spoke of her kindness, her wit, her belief in second chances. And that's what hurts most. She gave Kevin Ware one. Despite the red flags, despite the pain, she believed people could change. She thought love might fix what history had broken, but love wasn't enough to save her. In the wake of her murder, conversations erupted about domestic violence, about women who go missing, about the justice system and its blind spots. Many asked the same question. Why was Kevin Ware free in the first place? He had violated his bond. He had a history of aggression. And yet, he was still walking free when Taylor vanished. It sparked outrage, reflection, demands for reform. Advocates used Taylor's case to highlight the gaps in protective measures for women in dangerous relationships. Her story became more than a headline. It became a cautionary tale. A tragic example of what happens when warning signs are missed or ignored. In online spaces, her name trended for months. People created art, shared tributes, wrote messages of support for her family. They said her name to keep it from being forgotten. Because too often, women like Taylor disappear and the world moves on. But this time, people didn't want to move on. They wanted change. Some have called for Taylor's Law. Proposals that would strengthen bail restrictions for violent offenders, especially those with histories of abuse. Others have organized awareness campaigns to educate people on the patterns of coercive control, the subtle, escalating behaviors that can lead to tragedy. For Taylor's loved ones, the goal now is to make sure her death means something, that it's not just a painful memory, but a reason to speak out, a reason to intervene, a reason to believe people when they say they're scared. Because Taylor tried. She reached out. She confided in friends. And still, it wasn't enough to keep her safe. In interviews, her parents have said they'll never stop talking about her. They'll never stop honoring her memory. She was more than what happened to her, more than a victim. She was a daughter, a friend, a young woman who deserved more time, more life. And that's the hardest part. We often say justice was served when a guilty plea is entered, when the sentence is handed down. But for families like Taylor's, justice is complicated. It's not just about prison time. It's about the moments that were stolen, the birthdays that will never be celebrated, the future she never got to live. Kevin Ware's sentence gave the justice system closure, but Taylor's family will carry her absence for the rest of their lives. In the end, her story is a reminder of how quickly things can change, of how fragile safety can be, and of how deeply love and loss are intertwined. Taylor Pomaski was 29 years old. She had dreams. She had flaws. She had people who loved her fiercely. She laughed loudly. She gave people the benefit of the doubt. She believed that broken things could be fixed, and that even the most difficult roads could lead somewhere beautiful. She never expected that the person she let into her life would be the one to end it. Her story is not just about violence. It's about trust. It's about silence. It's about the thousands of moments that passed. Each one an opportunity to intervene, to ask harder questions, to offer help that goes beyond words. Taylor's life wasn't a tragedy. Her death was. But what she left behind, the people fighting for her, the awareness she sparked, the conversation she forced into the light, that matters. That's her legacy now. We live in a world where women go missing, and too often aren't searched for until it's too late. Where abusers are released and victims are told to be careful, where fear is dismissed as drama, where pleas for protection are seen as exaggerations until the headlines prove otherwise. Taylor's case reminds us that behind every statistic is a face, a voice, a human being who deserved better. Kevin Ware Jr. may spend decades behind bars, but the real sentence is the one carried by those Taylor left behind. The family that will never hear her voice again. The friends who replay every warning sign. The community still asking how this was allowed to happen. And so we say her name, not because it makes the pain easier, but because silence protects no one. We remember Taylor Pomaski not as a case, not as a cautionary tale, but as a woman who loved, who hoped, who tried, and who should still be here today. This is not just her story. It's a call to pay closer attention, to believe people when they say they're afraid, to act when we see someone hurting, and to never let the final chapter be the only one we tell. Story 4. In the heart of rural Ohio, nestled between rolling hills and quiet country roads, lies the small community of Pomeroy, a town where everyone knows each other, and where life moves at a slower, more peaceful pace. For most, it's a place where safety, familiarity, and routine reign. But on March 13, 2025, the discovery of a 28-year-old woman's body would shatter this peace, revealing a hidden truth that no one could have expected. Rosanna Kinsinger was a woman who embraced her faith and her community, a daughter, a sister, a friend, someone whose life had always been intertwined with the values of the Amish community she called home. Known for her unwavering kindness and dedication to those around her, she was the kind of person who made a difference in the lives of everyone she met. But on that fateful morning, her life would be cut short in a way that no one could have predicted. When law enforcement arrived at her home, they were met with a scene that would leave more questions than answers. The circumstances surrounding Rosanna's death were far from ordinary. There was no sign of struggle, no clear cause of death. It appeared at first glance to be a tragic accident until investigators began digging deeper. Rosanna's death quickly became the focus of an intense investigation. The Meigs County Sheriff's Office, alongside state authorities, began to piece together the events leading up to her final moments. What they uncovered would forever change the lives of those who knew her and would raise unsettling questions about the people closest to her. Her death wasn't just a tragedy for her family. It rippled through the very fabric of her community, a community that prided itself on its closeness and its trust in one another. As investigators began to search for answers, they quickly learned that what they had thought was a peaceful and idyllic life had been far more complicated. Rosanna Kinsinger's story is one of love, loss, and secrets, a story that stretches beyond the small-town confines of Pomeroy. It is a story that forces us to ask how well we truly know the people around us, and what we are willing to overlook when we trust someone with our hearts. As the investigation unfolds, we will explore the steps taken to uncover the truth behind Rosanna's death, the discovery of a man who might hold the key to unlocking this mystery, and the shock and heartbreak that has left her community reeling. But for now, we are left with one question. What really happened to Rosanna Kinsinger? Rosanna Kinsinger was a product of a place where life revolved around a land, faith, and family. Born and raised in the heart of rural Ohio, she had always known the value of hard work, simplicity, and close-knit relationships. Her upbringing in the Amish community shaped her into a woman who lived by a strict code of faith, grounded in values that emphasize kindness, loyalty, and humility. From a young age, Rosanna was known for her devotion to her faith. She had always been an active member of her local Amish church, participating in services, community events, and helping others whenever possible. She embodied the Amish ideals of self-sufficiency, simplicity, and compassion. Yet, despite her quiet demeanor and faith-driven lifestyle, Rosanna was not just another face in a small town. She was someone who had a profound impact on those who knew her. Rosanna's work ethic was unmatched. Whether it was caring for her garden, assisting with family matters, or volunteering at local events, she was always there, giving of herself. Her kindness was something that made her well-liked by everyone she met. To many, she was the epitome of the life they all strive for, a woman who was content in her simple world, yet had the ability to make others feel seen and valued. But beyond her role within the Amish community, Rosanna's life was one marked by deep family ties. She was a daughter, a sister, and a cherished friend. Family was everything to her. She had a close-knit relationship with her siblings, and they spent countless hours together, whether they were working side by side or sharing in the simple pleasures of rural life. For those who knew Rosanna, it was clear that her loyalty and love for her family ran deep. Her commitment to her faith and family provided her with a sense of purpose. Rosanna lived by a set of principles that left little room for doubt in her dedication, whether at church or in the community. She was a figure people could count on, someone whose presence was a constant reminder of what it meant to be part of a larger, supportive family, both in faith and in life. In a town like Pomeroy, where life moved at its own pace and everyone knew each other, it was easy to think that nothing could go wrong. It was easy to believe that the life Rosanna led would continue uninterrupted, that her days of quiet fulfillment and family bonds would go on forever. Yet, in the shadows of that tranquility, there were forces at play that no one could have anticipated. Rosanna Kinsinger's life was a reflection of the values that shaped her. But for all the goodness and simplicity she embraced, there were complexities beneath the surface. Things left unsaid, relationships that weren't as clear-cut as they seemed. And when her life was suddenly taken, the mystery surrounding her death will reveal these hidden layers, leaving the people who loved her questioning everything they thought they knew. On the morning of March 13th, 2025, the community of Pomeroy awoke to a scene that would forever change the town. The death of Rosanna Kinsinger was not just a personal loss. It was a disruption to the fragile peace that held this rural town together. When authorities received the call that something wasn't right at Rosanna's home, they had no idea the magnitude of what they were about to uncover. When the sheriff's deputies arrived at the scene, they found Rosanna's body in her home. It was immediately clear that something wasn't right. There were no obvious signs of injury, no violent struggles. Her home, which had always been a place of warmth and comfort, was now the scene of a tragedy that would soon captivate not only the local community, but also the entire state of Ohio. At first, investigators were uncertain how to classify her death. There were no signs of forced entry, no indication that a robbery had occurred. Rosanna's personal belongings remained untouched, and the house appeared orderly. The initial impression was that of an unfortunate accident, perhaps a fall, a medical issue, something that might have led to her untimely death. But as the investigation progressed, it became clear that there were more questions than answers. The Meigs County Sheriff's Office quickly secured the scene, gathering evidence and attempting to reconstruct the events leading up to that morning. What they didn't expect, however, was a twist that would send the investigation in an entirely new direction. While the cause of death remained undetermined, the Sheriff's Office began to focus on one key detail: the position of Rosanna's body. There was something unsettling about the way she was found. It didn't match the pattern of an accidental death. She had been discovered in a position that seemed unnatural, as though she had been placed there rather than falling or succumbing to a medical emergency. It was the first hint that this wasn't the peaceful, quiet life it appeared to be. Initial autopsy results confirmed that there were no external wounds, no cuts, bruises, or signs of a violent confrontation. The coroner couldn't pinpoint a definitive cause of death. It wasn't until toxicology reports came back that investigators began to consider other possibilities. The results were inconclusive, but they raised more questions than answers. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't natural causes. Rosanna's death was being categorized as suspicious. And with that, the investigation took a darker turn. Authorities held a press conference, confirming the death was under investigation. Sheriff Scott Fitch, standing before a crowd of reporters, emphasized that the case was far from closed. While he refrained from speculating, his words carried an unspoken weight. This wasn't going to be a straightforward case. As the days passed, the uncertainty and fear began to spread through Pomeroy. Everyone knew Rosanna. She was a part of the fabric of this town. But now, with her death looming over the community, questions were beginning to surface. Who would want to harm someone so loved? And if this was indeed murder, who was responsible? The town began to look inward. Was it someone in the community? Could it have been someone close to her? Someone who knew her routine, her habits, her personal life? And what about her relationships? Was there something in Rosanna's past that could explain her untimely death? No one could answer these questions yet, but the sense of unease was palpable. The search for answers grew more urgent with each passing day. Investigators began to interview everyone who had been close to Rosanna, family members, friends, even acquaintances who had interacted with her in the weeks leading up to her death. Among those questioned was a man who seemed to stand out, a figure from Rosanna's past who had recently entered her life. Samuel Hostetler, a 34-year-old man who had recently moved to Pomeroy from Kentucky, quickly became a person of interest. He had met Rosanna in the months before her death, and their relationship, though not well known, raised suspicions. Hostetler was a recent arrival to the area, and the nature of his involvement with Rosanna was unclear. Was he just another acquaintance, or had his presence in her life been more complicated? As detectives questioned Hostetler, they uncovered more about his background, his past, his relationships, and his possible motives. What they learned raised the stakes of the investigation significantly. Was Samuel Hostetler the key to solving Rosanna Kinsinger's death, or was he just another person caught up in the unraveling mystery? Samuel Hostetler was an enigma to the people of Pomeroy, a recent arrival to the community. He was an outsider in a town where everyone else seemed to know each other. Hostetler had moved to Ohio from Kentucky just a few months before Rosanna's death, seeking a fresh start, or so he claimed. He quickly became a part of Rosanna's life, but few knew the full extent of their relationship. He had been seen around town, often at local stores, speaking briefly with residents, but his interactions were minimal. He was described as quiet, reserved, someone who didn't draw too much attention. However, his sudden presence in Rosanna's life raised suspicions among some who were familiar with her. They had seen the two together, though never for long. Friends and family members described the relationship as complicated. Many who were questioned by law enforcement recalled that Rosanna had started to withdraw from social gatherings in the weeks leading up to her death. It was subtle at first. She was still active in her community, still attending church, but those closest to her noticed a shift. She had been spending more time with Samuel, though details about their private conversations and interactions remained unclear. Was it a friendship that turned into something more, or was it something darker altogether? In an interview with a family member, he said, "I just felt like something wasn't right. She'd been so happy before, and then suddenly she'd become distant. She never really talked about Samuel, and she seemed so focused on him, like there was a secret she wasn't sharing." While Rosanna's friends and family struggled to understand the sudden change in her behavior, the investigation into Samuel Hostetler began to gain momentum. Detectives quickly learned that Hostetler had a complicated past, one that was not immediately obvious. It became apparent that he had left Kentucky under circumstances that had raised more questions than answers. He had a history of brief, troubled relationships, and his ties to the Amish community were sketchy at best. Investigators soon uncovered troubling details from his past, allegations of domestic disputes, and arrests for minor offenses. He had a reputation for being volatile and controlling in his relationships, though nothing in his criminal history directly linked him to violent crime. But detectives knew they needed to dig deeper. There was a connection between Samuel and Rosanna, one that they could no longer ignore. Law enforcement began reviewing Hostetler's communications, combing through text messages, emails, and social media profiles in search of any evidence that might explain the nature of his relationship with Rosanna. What they discovered painted a picture of a man who had grown increasingly possessive over the past few weeks. There were numerous messages, some friendly, others far more intimate, and several that seemed to reveal an unsettling shift in tone. As their relationship developed, Samuel's texts became more insistent, demanding, and at times controlling. One particular exchange caught investigators' attention, a series of messages from Samuel to Rosanna that appeared late in the evening just days before her death. In them, he expressed frustration and jealousy, accusing her of spending too much time away from him. "I just want you to be with me," one message read. "You don't need to be around other people all the time." As they examined the text, investigators began to form a clearer picture of Samuel's possible motives. Rosanna, it seemed, had been trying to distance herself from him, at least emotionally. Could it be that he had become angry at her desire to break free? Had the pressure of his possessiveness pushed him to the point where he felt he had no other choice but to silence her? On the surface, Samuel Hostetler appeared to be just another lonely man searching for connection in a small town. But as investigators uncovered more about his past, his behavior, and his relationship with Rosanna, they began to question whether he was capable of much more. With each new detail, they wondered if Samuel Hostetler might be hiding a far more dangerous side. As the investigation intensified, authorities turned to security footage in the area surrounding Rosanna's home. What they discovered would add yet another layer to this complex mystery. It seemed that Samuel had been near her house in the hours before her body was discovered. The footage, though grainy, showed a figure matching his description walking along the road leading to her property. Was he just visiting? Or had his visit been something far more calculated? In the wake of Rosanna Kinsinger's tragic death, the town of Pomeroy was left in shock, a place where everyone knew each other, where the most significant drama often revolved around local high school sports or a neighborly dispute, suddenly found itself grappling with a tragedy that had shaken its very core. The murder of Rosanna wasn't just a loss. It was a wound that would take years to heal. For those who knew her best, Rosanna's death was more than just a headline. She was a beloved member of the community, known for her smile, her generosity, and her dedication to her faith. People would remember her standing side by side with others in the church choir, volunteering for various causes, and helping in every way she could. But now, her absence left an aching void. What started as a quiet evening in a small town had become a story of tragedy and despair. A local shopkeeper, with tears, said she was one of the nicest people you could meet, always ready to lend a hand, always there when you needed her. It doesn't make sense. I still can't believe it. Someone like her, gone just like that. As news of Rosanna's death spread throughout Pomeroy, the town came together in a way that could only be described as heartfelt solidarity. A memorial was established in the park, where residents would gather to mourn, share memories, and try to make sense of the violence that had claimed one of their own. For many, it was difficult to reconcile the image of the kind-hearted woman they knew with the brutal crime that had taken place in their own backyard. A candlelight vigil was organized shortly after Samuel Hostetler's arrest. It wasn't just an expression of grief. It was an outpouring of support for Rosanna's family. Neighbors, friends, and even those who had only met her in passing came to honor her memory. At the vigil, her mother stood at the front, her eyes red, her voice trembling as she spoke about the daughter she had lost. "Rosanna was the light of our lives," she said, her voice cracking. "She didn't deserve this. No one deserves this." Rosanna's family, who had always felt the warmth of her love and the strength of her spirit, now had to contend with the loss of a cherished member. Her mother and father, her sisters, her close friends. They were left to face the painful reality of how the quiet, calm town they loved had been irrevocably changed. For them, the arrest of Samuel Hostetler, while a step toward justice, could never replace the vibrant life they had lost. The loss of Rosanna wasn't just felt by her family. It rippled through the community, affecting all those who had come to know her. Her death raised unsettling questions for the residents of Pomeroy. How could something like this happen here? Who could commit such a crime in their tight-knit town, where everyone kept themselves and cared for one another? A teacher in an interview said, "Rosanna was always so good with the kids. She'd volunteer at school events, help with the younger children's programs. She was always a positive influence. To think that she's gone, it doesn't make sense." The kids who looked up to her, they're all asking questions. Why would something like this happen? As the months passed, Pomeroy began to heal, but the emotional toll was undeniable. The town was forever altered by the loss of Rosanna. Her murder wasn't just a criminal act. It was a community tragedy. In a place where crime was rare, the brutality of the murder cast a long shadow over the town. People looked at each other differently, unsure of who could be trusted. A sense of insecurity had taken root. Even law enforcement, who had worked tirelessly to solve the case, was affected. The sheriff's office had been inundated with calls, with residents voicing their concerns, asking how such a thing could happen in their own backyard. The pressure to bring justice to Rosanna's family weighed heavily on the department. Yet, even as they worked to piece together the fact of the case, The sheriff and his deputies knew that no amount of justice would ever fill the void left by Rosanna's death. In the months that followed, Pomeroy would begin to recover, but it would never forget. The town had learned a hard lesson, that evil doesn't announce itself. It doesn't respect boundaries or locations. It simply exists, waiting to strike when least expected. And for those who knew and loved Rosanna Kinsinger, they would carry the weight of her absence for the rest of their lives. As the arrest of Samuel Hostetler sent shockwaves through the town of Pomeroy, it also set in motion a series of legal proceedings that would keep both the community and the nation on edge for months to come. The case was far from over. With a charge of first-degree murder now filed against Samuel, all eyes turned to courtroom, where justice would either be served or falter in the face of complex legal battles. The first of many hearings began soon after Samuel's arrest. The courtroom was packed with reporters, the victim's family, and those who had followed the case closely. The judge, having reviewed the evidence presented by the prosecution, made a decision to deny bail, citing the severity of the charges and the flight risk Samuel posed. The decision was met with mixed reactions. While Rosanna's family felt a sense of relief, there were still many unanswered questions hanging in the air. Samuel's defense attorney was quick to challenge the prosecution's evidence, arguing that there was insufficient proof to justify holding his client without bail. They focused on the circumstantial nature of the evidence, claiming that there was no direct physical evidence linking Samuel to Rosanna's death. The defense raised doubts about the validity of the surveillance footage and questioned the reliability of the witness testimonies that placed Samuel at the scene. For Rosanna's parents, the proceedings were an emotional roller coaster. They had already lost their daughter, someone who had been the center of their world, and now they were forced to watch as the man accused of her murder stood before them, attempting to undermine the very evidence that pointed to his guilt. Each argument, each delay, felt like another blow to their already shattered hearts. As the weeks passed, the legal teams on both sides intensified their preparations. The prosecution, bolstered by the mounting evidence of Samuel's troubling behavior and his connection to Rosanna, worked diligently to build their case. They focused heavily on the motive, the jealousy, the possessiveness, and the disturbing pattern of control Samuel exhibited in his past relationships. They presented text messages, phone records, and other documents that painted a picture of a man obsessed, driven by a need to dominate. Meanwhile, Samuel's defense team continued to chip away at the prosecution's narrative. They argued that the evidence presented was circumstantial, and that the prosecution's case was based on assumptions rather than facts. They insisted that Samuel's arrest had been rushed, that the law enforcement had focused too early on him as a suspect, without considering other possibilities. As the case developed, the stakes grew higher. For Samuel Hostetler, the proceedings were a constant reminder of the gravity of the situation he found himself in as the accused murderer. He sat in silence, waiting as the legal battle unfolded around him. The question on everyone's mind: was Samuel truly the perpetrator of Rosanna's death, or was there something more to the story, something that hadn't yet been uncovered? For Rosanna's family, the wait was agonizing. Every new piece of evidence, every new hearing, felt like another chapter in an endless nightmare. They sat through each proceeding, watching as the prosecution and defense laid out their arguments. They clung to the hope that justice would prevail, but deep down, they knew that nothing would bring Rosanna back. The pain of losing her was something they would carry with them forever. As the preliminary hearings concluded, the judge set a date for the trial. The legal teams were now preparing for what would be a high-profile case, one that would capture national attention. With the charge of first-degree murder on the table, the trial would be the final stage in pursuit of justice for Rosanna Kinsinger. Would Samuel Hostetler be convicted of crime, or would he walk free, his name cleared of all charges? For Rosanna's family, the trial would be their final chance to secure justice for their daughter. As they stood by her grave, holding on to one another for strength, they understood that the road ahead would be long and difficult. The courtroom would become their battleground, and they would fight for every shred of justice that Rosanna deserved. The community of Pomeroy, though still reeling from the shock, rallied around Rosanna's family, offering support in any way they could. The trial was shaping up to be a defining moment for the town, A moment that would determine whether the quiet streets they once knew would ever return to normal, or the darkness of his crime would forever change the landscape of their lives. As the day of the trial loomed closer, the tension in the air was palpable. The community, still in disbelief over what had transpired, waited anxiously for the truth to be revealed. They hoped that the legal proceedings would bring clarity to the tragic loss of Rosanna Kinsinger, and that those responsible for her death would be held accountable. The trial of Samuel Hostetler will become one of the most closely watched cases in the region. The outcome will be more than just a verdict. It would be a measure of justice for Rosanna and a testament to the community's resolve in the face of unfathomable loss. As the town of Pomeroy moves forward, the tragic story of Rosanna Kinsinger and Samuel Hostetler will forever linger in the hearts of those who knew her. Though time may ease some of the pain, the scars left by Rosanna's untimely death run deep. For her family, the journey of grief has no clear endpoint. There is no true closure, only the slow process of learning to live without her. For Rosanna's parents, every day is a reminder of the daughter they raised and lost. They hold on to the memories, the way she would light up a room, her laughter echoing to the halls of their home, the small, everyday moments that now feel so distant. In the midst of their grief, they are forced to reconcile with a world that has taken so much from them. Justice, while important, cannot bring back their beloved daughter. At the park, where Rosanna's memorial once stood in the center of the town, the candles have long since flickered out. The flowers have dried, but the memories linger. The townspeople still gather at the spot from time to time, remembering a woman who was far more than just a victim. She was a sister, a daughter, a friend, a beacon of light in their tight-knit community. Though life is carried on in Pomeroy, it will never be the same. The ripple effects of Rosanna's death extend far beyond the courtroom. The community that once felt untouchable, safe in its small-town isolation, now bears the weight of a broken trust. What happened in Pomeroy is a harsh reminder that violence can touch anyone, anywhere, even in places that seem to be untouched by the world's darker realities. The trial of Samuel Hostetler is now complete. The verdict has been handed down. For Rosanna's family, this decision brings a sense of finality, a sense that the wheels of justice have turned in their favor. But even as Samuel faces the consequences of his actions, there remains the undeniable truth that no verdict can restore what was lost. The pain of losing Rosanna, the impact on her loved ones, and the destruction of the community's sense of security will never be fully erased. At Rosanna's gravesite, her family stands together, united in their love for a woman they will never forget. In their hearts, she will always be with them, her smile, her warmth, the laughter they shared. They know that no amount of time, no verdict, no legal proceeding will ever bring her back. But they take solace in the fact that Rosanna's memory is one of love, kindness, and compassion, qualities that will continue to live on in those who knew her. As for the town of Pomeroy, it continues to heal, but it is forever changed. The case may be over, but the emotional scars remain. The town's sense of innocence, the trust its people had in each other, was shattered in an instant, but through the grief and the pain, there is resilience. The community is slowly rebuilding, not just in physical terms, but emotionally as well. The strength they find in one another, the shared memory of Rosanna's life, is what will carry them forward. Rosanna's legacy is not defined by her death, but by the love she gave, the lives she touched, and the difference she made in the community. Though her story ended tragically, she left behind a lasting impact on those around her. She was a woman who lived with purpose, who gave of herself freely, and who, in her short time on earth, taught others the value of kindness and generosity. Though the story of Rosanna Kinsinger's life and death is marked by tragedy, it also serves as a reminder of the importance of community, the power of love, and the need for justice. We may never fully understand why such senseless acts occur, but through them, we are reminded of the fragility of life, the impact of our actions, and the responsibility we all have to protect those around us. In the end, the story of Rosanna Kinsinger is one of heartbreak, but it is also one of love and resilience. A community forever changed, a family torn apart, and a young woman whose memory will endure long after the courtroom lights have dimmed. And as we reflect on her life and the journey that followed, we are reminded of the strength of those left behind, the strength to carry on, to remember, and to honor the life that was taken too soon.